Yatikita sannito yodita santo sukhasanubu. Namo Buddhaya. Namo Buddhaya. Namo that that chanting that was being played before, that you were listening, does everybody know the meaning of those chants? Of course, that's what's called the basic or standard kind of Buddha puja, at least within the Sri Lankan Theravada tradition. Reflections on different aspects of the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and the teachings of the Buddha. But anyway, we've made some YouTube videos that have the Pali text as well as the English translation on a video that has the chanting that you're hearing, but at the same time you can read the Pali text of that chanting, but at the same time you can read the English meaning of it too. So it's a good way to kind of learn sort of chanting on one hand, and but then especially the English meaning of what the chanting is, because if you don't really know the meaning of it, then it may be nice to listen to and soothing, but it's missing the meaning, because the meaning of those words are very powerful. Like this morning when I translated that one text. But anyway, when are those going to be ready? They're already on the YouTube, on our website, but you're going to do it better, right? Still a work in progress. But anyway, when you go home, if you can want to learn the meaning of those chants, you can watch those YouTube videos. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more about the teachings of the Buddha. And as we all know, he formulated the teachings in the Four Noble Truths. Because the Buddha, he taught differently than a lot of other, religions and so on. And he talked about the experience directly of the human being, and about suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the way leading to the cessation of suffering. So he wasn't interested in who created the world, when it was created, where it was created, how it was created. The fact is, it's here, right? It's here and now. People suffer in their minds. They suffer from sickness, old age, disease, death, worry, fear, anxiety, mental disorders, and, probably more than 1,000 ways that people can suffer physically, mentally, and even spiritually. So anyway, the first noble truth of suffering, it's very deep. And sometimes when I've given this talk, to American audiences or some people, there'd be a person in the audience said, "What's all this talk about suffering? Buddhists always talk about suffering, suffering, suffering. I want to hear about happiness." And then he said, "I'm not suffering. I can't relate to all that." And then I might ask him a question. "Well, did you ever have, bad dreams and trouble sleeping at night?" He said, "Well, yeah, my son and daughter got arrested for drugs or doing other things. My wife was sleeping around with other people. And yeah, I lost sleep over that." And he said, "Oh, that's not suffering?" "Oh, no, that's just normal," he says. So this kind of a person has a very difficult time understanding the teachings of the Buddha about suffering. A lot of people think about suffering as just the biggies, bone cancer and getting crunched in an automobile accident and become a paraplegic or worse, or so on. But it's much more subtle than that. Anyway, there's 3 levels of the meaning of suffering. The Buddha defined them. He said, birth, sickness, old age, disease, and death are suffering. And then he went on to say, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair are suffering. So that's the first definition. So those are the heavies, right? The heavies of suffering. But then he goes on to say, not getting what you want and getting what you don't want is suffering. So that's, that's implied, but it's a little subtle. But basically, it means a state of dissatisfaction, not being satisfied. And then he said, after saying that, he said, in short, right? In short, the 5 aggregates of clinging are suffering. Now, the 5 aggregates require a little bit more explanation, but I like to refer to that level of suffering as the suffering of ignorance or spiritual suffering, not knowing the truth about the nature of consciousness, not knowing the truth about our own sort of existence. So, of course, the level of physical suffering, there's not much one can do about being born, sickness, old age, disease, and death. Now, you can do something, but ultimately that cannot be stopped. You can do things, try not to get so sick or get diseases by, so many pills and therapies and whatever, but you can't really do too much about that. And then the sorrow, grief, lamentation, and despair is caused by those levels of suffering, especially the suffering of death of your loved ones, your friends. People grieve and lament and suffer, or even when yourself are sick, worrying, or you found out you have a horrible disease, incurable disease, and you're going to suffer mentally, and so on. So there's the level of physical suffering that's connected with karma, and then there's the level of mental suffering, which is not getting what you want and getting what you don't want. And as I mentioned, it's basically the, not being content with the present moment, and it's not being satisfied. So we all have wants and desires, young students are trying to, get into college of their choice. They're trying to follow a certain profession, and then they fail out. And so many, people want to, so many things in life. And, they're not always can be satisfied in that. Anybody have any experience with that? Trying to find the perfect mate and the perfect soul mate, things like that. So many other things. And the worry about getting what you don't want. So how many worry about not getting what they don't want? Of course, especially in terms of diseases like now, because of the genome and all, the idea about genes, and your parents have certain genes, they had diseases, and then you're worried, oh my gosh, am I going to get those genes? Am I going to get these diseases, right? They do. They worry about it. And that's why people are trying to change their genes. All this, this chemistry and biology, they're trying to do all that. But it's a lost cause, basically. So anyway, now there is something we can do about the suffering connected with not getting what you want and getting what you don't want, to a certain extent, by cultivating our mind and meditation and so on. But the last one is the one I wanted to focus on a little more, is what I call spiritual suffering. There are some people in the world that don't suffer much from diseases and sicknesses. I mean, my mother lived to be 102 years old, and she didn't really have any the major, big, heavy types of suffering, or so many other people, and maybe you get a the flu or cold every 3 or 4 years or something, or some other kind of things. But there are a lot of people like that. They have good genes or whatever, and they don't have a lot of those kind of physical sufferings. And maybe they don't have a lot of mental sufferings either. They might be quite well balanced and so on. Because if they don't have too much of the physical sufferings, and they don't have those kind of mental sufferings that so many other people will do. But the last one is the spiritual suffering. So I like to define that as basically being disconnected from the whole, still feeling like a poor little me, I'm here and the world is out there, and there's this kind of division. Even though there's not too many problems, maybe in a person's life, still there's that kind of separation from the whole. I call that spiritual suffering, or not knowing the truth, and especially about consciousness. So, and that's what the 5 aggregates are. And the 5 aggregates, you've heard me mention it a couple of times. How many people know what the 5 aggregates are? A few. Can you rattle them off real quick? Form, feeling, perception, volition, consciousness. Okay, the 5 aggregates basically include everything that you could possibly experience. So the aggregate of material matter. And what's the definition of an aggregate? Those of you who know English grammar and so on. Say aggregate. Yeah, basically it's a collection of things. A compound, an aggregate, a collection of different things. So the aggregate of matter, everything in the material world, including this physical body, including, trees and wood and, every manifestation, this earth, even the sun, belongs to the material realm. And basically that means anything made up of molecules and atoms, cells, atoms, and molecules, and molecules, belong to the aggregate of matter. So we all know that this physical body, we look at this physical body, you feel it, right? It feels hard and solid. Where you can see it, it's standing out in space. But what is it really? Is it an aggregate? How many cells go to make up the human body? Trillions. And how many molecules make up one cell? I don't know the number, but probably hundreds, thousands, maybe a million. And how many atoms make up a molecule? So these are all, it's an aggregate. So that's why they call it the aggregate of form. But all those atoms, molecules, and cells are constantly changing. So anyway, I hope this is not too kind of intellectual or confusing, but it's important to understand, and it's actually something you can contemplate. You can kind of even think about when you're meditating and feel it. But then everything else also belongs to, and it's anything that you can see. So when you're looking at, actually, no, we'll get to that later. Okay. So anyway, there's form, but normally we take these things to be, especially the body, we take it to be me, mine, and myself. And then there's feelings. The second aggregate is feelings. These are the pleasant feelings, painful feelings, and neutral feelings that we experience when we have contact with the sense objects. So everything you see, like I mentioned with the baby, when the baby was born, and then he got this first pleasurable feeling where, his mother, suckling him and so on, and or the grandmother giving him the first chocolate, and they get a pleasurable feeling. Or the painful feeling. Or most of the feelings are neutral. So when you meditate, like from your meditation, maybe this morning, how many people felt some painful feelings? Probably everybody, yeah, after sitting for at least 20 minutes. You didn't raise your hand, but I know you did. How many people felt some pleasant feelings? Anybody feel some pleasurable feelings? What was that all about? And how many people felt neutral feelings? See, the neutral feelings don't grab our mind very much, but it's the pleasurable and painful ones that, attract the mind. So the neutral ones are like white noise, like just the feeling of your hands touching together, or the feeling of your, toes or something, or just, the sound of the AC unit going on. You get used to those things, and so they don't really grab your attention one way or another, but they're called neutral feelings. But it's primarily the painful and pleasant ones that we react to, because we want to get a hold of or keep the pleasurable feelings. In other words, if you have a pleasurable feeling, how many people wanted it to last this morning? when you had a pleasurable feeling? Did it last? Maybe for a few moments or a minute? Changed. But you wanted it, and when it disappeared, you said, shucks. And then how many people had fear about the pain coming to them? They're worried about it. If I sit longer, I'm going to get pain. So, we try to hold on to the pleasurable feelings we have. And if we don't have them, we're actively seeking out, planning, scheming, conniving how we're going to get those pleasurable feelings, whether it's with another person, or it's from certain objects, or it's going on your favorite holiday, or going out to see the sunset. So many things can give you pleasurable feeling, but they're all impermanent. But most of our karma is directed at trying to keep or get pleasurable feelings, and to prevent the painful ones coming, but if they do come, struggling to push them away. So a lot of, murders and other things are based on wanting to get rid of somebody, right? It causes you a painful feeling. So anyway, the aggregate of feelings. So everything that we've ever experienced in life, what we see, hear, taste, smell, touch, or even think about, usually belongs to one of those categories of pleasurable or painful feelings. And then, but what is actually a feeling, actually I wanted to mention this about the material form. Okay, you're sitting there meditating, right? So you have this body. But actually, what do you feel? Right now, just, press your arm like that. Go ahead, press your arm like that. What are you feeling? You're feeling some kind of a pressure, right? A sensation. But you say you're feeling your arm. No. What you're feeling is actually just a sensation of a certain density, and so on. It's your mind that identifies it as the arm, and that's the next aggregate of perception. So perception, basically all forms are just vibrations. And this is an important thing to understand in terms of the meditation, is that, all those feelings, there's just vibration, painful vibration, pleasant vibration, a vibration of hardness, vibration of fluidity, what are called the four elements: earth, fire, and water, and air. That's what the body is composed of. But all these are just cells, molecules, and atoms, right? H2O, right? Water, atom of hydrogen, and two of, what is it? H2O, oxygen. Come on, you chemists. Need some help here. So right there, science is telling you water is just H2O, an atom of hydrogen, or a molecule of hydrogen, and two of oxygen. So why are people calling it water, water, water? Okay, anyway, so basically it's just a vibration, because all those things are vibrating. You've seen pictures of atoms, right? The electrons are, and electrons are just electricity. So actually, if you ultimately break down the material matter, it's just condensed energy. And even, Einstein, quantum physics, and all that, they talk about that too. And so that's the kind of understanding we can bring with us in our meditation. So when you're sitting there worrying about your body, it's because you're identifying it as a body, a solid body, and it's mine. But instead, if you train your mind to just see it as vibration, earth element, fire element, water element, air element, that's the way the Buddha actually defined it. He told his son Rahula, meditate on the four elements. This body is just four elements. Because then there's nothing kind of tangible or meaning of it. So this is actually an aspect of about the what people are asking about. Can we use thinking in meditation? That is a form of thinking. Think about the body in reality, as it really is. So next time you in your next meditation, anytime you feel something solid, like your hands touching, your buttocks pressing the floor, even the clothing touching the skin, just train yourself to say earth vibration. Or if you feel a tear coming down, you feel saliva in the mouth, you feel sweat under the armpits, water vibration. Or if you feel some heat in the body or heat in the room, just heat vibration. Or temperature vibration. Any range of cool or heat belongs to the heat element. And if you move, like the breathing going in and out, this is air element. So this is what is called the meditation strategy. It's a strategy to outfox or outwit our mind, our conditioned mind, which is always wanting to see things as solid things or take them as self, take them as permanent, take them as self, take them as an object of happiness. So the Buddha devised this strategy. So we've been brainwashed into thinking, basically. I mean, people don't like to hear talk like this, but the Buddha told it as it is. Because suffering is very deep. That's the thing. People, this idea of suffering, very superficial for them. But the Buddha, that's why he's called the Buddha. Right? So he really saw how deeply conditioned our mind is to clinging to everything. So the perception is how the mind creates objects out of just vibrations. So anytime you feel, you go through the body and say, okay, that's my eyes. But the eyes is a word. The eyes is a perception. It's how the mind creates an object out of just an amorphous vibration. And this is where the brain works. Or a sound. Now, if your eyes closed, if you have your eyes closed, then in meditation I say some words, you might say, oh, Bhante's talking. Or if I go like that, you think, oh, he slapped his hands. Anybody think like that? Anybody notice their mind doing that? Okay, that because your mind, what you hear, you can only hear sound. You can't hear Bhante talking. That's your mind talking. That's not the actual sound. And you can only see colors in certain shapes. You don't see, but when you see a monk up here, that's your mind creating this idea of a monk. In the same with the other smells and tastes. Maybe somebody lets some bad air out of their backside and whiffs by, and then you're creating, and those kind of images then are connected with the past and the future and your experience with them from the past and the future. And then that triggers off other memories about it and emotions about it. Anger, hatred, desire to get revenge, or desire to due to so many things. So you can see how our whole mental process gets proliferated or proliferates due to just these momentary sensory experiences. Now, this is at the very heart of wisdom, the heart of the insights that come through meditation, because it's clinging to these ideas that these objects are real, and my happiness or suffering depends on them. And clinging to these, that all of our karma is created in the suffering that we have to experience from that. So that's why the Buddha devised this. Anyway, I'm want to get through the rest of these. So, how many have I talked about so far? Aggregates. Which ones? Form, feeling. You have to get them in the right order because the right order is very important. Yes, form, feeling, perception. But I would rather call it vibration. I would rather call form vibration, because already when you say form, you have an idea of some kind of an object. But a vibration is clear. A vibration is kind of nothing, right? You can't put your hand on any kind of vibration. And the perception is actually creates the form. Because this idea of a person here standing out separate from everything else is the function of perception. When you look around the room, just take a gaze around the room and see how your mind identifies all the objects that you see behind me and so on. Go ahead. Just move your head like that. Even though you might not be saying the words, you identify, that's a wall, that's a flower, that's a Buddha image, that's a tree, that's the monk, that's a microphone, and so on. Could anybody kind of see that, the mind doing that? I mean, it's subtle, but yet it's there. So those are perceptions. But all those are just visible vibrations striking your eye. But each one of them is unique. And it has its own, history, through learning and through your own experience. That's, basically stored by the mind and the brain and the unconscious mind. So actually, our mind works very much like Google. Google. It's always trying to guess the future, isn't it? You look up a word, you type 2 or 3 letters of a word, and all of a sudden it's producing 10 choices of what you're actually trying to look at, right? So our brain is working like that too, because it works off of our memory and our history of using the computer. So it's really very similar, actually. The analogy of the human brain and perception and the way computers works is probably the best example that we would have in our contemporary world. But anyway, so there's a little saying, what you feel or what you see is what you're going to feel, and what you feel is what you perceive. And then what you perceive is what you're going to think about. So the fourth aggregate is called sankhara. And it's it's the largest of all those kind of aggregates. But to keep it simple, you could call it our reactions and also thoughts. Thoughts, reactions, memories, and basically they're the habits. It's the habits, the way we habitually react or think about objects that we see, smell, taste, touch, and even think about. So, and there's body sankharas, which are our physical habits. So if you have an itch and you go like that, that would be a sankhara. I mean, it's a habit. You're not really deciding to do that. It does it because of habit and the way the nervous system is programmed, and the fact that you keep practicing scratching and itching all the time. So anytime anything like that occurs, the body just does it automatically. But the way we can reprogram it, there is ways we can reprogram it, and that's through meditation. But anyway, so the sankharas are basically all these ways that we think and react to the world, which we've accumulated. It's all of our reactions. That's why it's called an aggregate. Since you were a baby, and everything the baby learned and the way they reacted, that was accumulating sankharas. Millions and billions of them. So whatever you perceive, that's what you're going to think about. Like you perceive this image, and then that's Bhante Rahula or something else. And, it'll trigger off other types of thoughts. So those four things are the mental process. So form or vibration, feeling, perception, and volition. So again, you have a vibration, and then the mind, just like Google can create an image out of that, which is the perception, and then the volition, the reaction to that perception, and then thinking about it, or emotional things. And triggering off our actual physical actions and the karma that we create. And then the last one of the aggregates, anybody know that? Yeah, consciousness. Or vijnana is the Pali term, consciousness. Now, consciousness is it's a little bit difficult to describe because it's very connected with perception. Because consciousness without perception consciousness is basically just a light, like the light in this room. Well, let's say you go into a dark movie theater and then you turn on the lights and you see everything. So it's the consciousness that allows us to actually see and hear and smell and taste. It receives those vibrations. But it can't do anything by itself. So it needs feeling, perception, and volition to move that consciousness. Otherwise, consciousness is just hearing, seeing, smelling. That's all. The consciousness just receives vibrations, but it can't do anything about them without the other aggregates, without the feeling, perception, volition, and consciousness. But also consciousness is the ego consciousness. I mean, the best way in terms of our meditation to understand when I say consciousness is the ego consciousness. That means the sense of, I am doing this. I am hearing, I am seeing, I am deciding, I am thinking. I want this, I want that. The sense of I is behind everything that we do. And we cling to that consciousness. Of course, the baby didn't have that in the beginning, did it? If you follow that train of thought. Okay, the baby wasn't born with the ego consciousness, but it acquired it, as I've already mentioned, and then it gets stuck with that the whole life and believes in it. and clings to it. This is me. This is I. Look, everything that you do can be broken down into what are called the Trinity, something called the Trinity of the ego. You might have heard the Christian Trinity, they have some Trinity, right? But the Trinity of the ego is I, me, and mine. So everything that we experience in life, we're experiencing in terms of I, me, or mine. I want this, I don't want that. Or give it to me, look at me. And mine, 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 mine. It's very interesting. Just check it up. Watch your own mind and experience. It's very subtle, it's not, you're not saying those words all the time, but behind that is that feeling of I, me, and mine. So that's what we call the ego consciousness. And that's the vijnana, because only an arhat is without it, is without the ego. An enlightened person is the only one that is without ego consciousness, at least in the human plane. So that's why I kind of, to simplify, when I talk about the consciousness, I qualify it as ego consciousness. Because that's the primary important part of it, that we cling to this consciousness as I, me, and mine. And temporarily, as a human being, okay, we need to do that to basically live and communicate in the world. But some people, and I probably don't have to mention names, certain politicians, they inflate that ego and they really cling to that ego and they want to build it up and they want to dominate and defeat others. Or other people might have a negative ego. Oh, I can't do that. I'm so bad. That's also clinging to the ego. There's positive ego and negative ego, but both of them bring suffering. Because it's basically an illusion. So anyway, that's why it's called the aggregate of consciousness. I've actually, is that diagram here? I made up a diagram of the 5 aggregates. Actually, it's a diagram that shows them like concentric circles. Can you imagine 5 concentric circles? You know what that is? So you have a big circle. Okay, that would be like the material world form, the vibration, material vibrations. Then just inside that, you have another circle called Vedana, the feelings. Then inside the Vedana circle, you have the perception. Inside that, you have the Sankhara. And inside that, in the very center, the hub is the ego or consciousness. Sense of I am doing and experiencing the world. And so even though the ego is the ultimate cause of suffering, ignorance, we can't just get at it because it's got 4 perimeter defenses. It's at the very center. You can't just jump into the center. It's like a battlefield. Anybody reading about the war in Ukraine? Ukraine's trying to get to the Russians, and they have to go through a minefield, and they have to go through the various types of, fortifications and all that. So the same way, our mind has created these defenses too. The ego is very clever. So it's created all these defenses to protect itself. And so it's like an obstacle course. When you meditate, first thing you run into is the physical body. Boom. Oh, pains. And then once you're able to kind of get beyond that, then you start feeling all these icky sensations inside, biting, itching sensations, other aches and pains, or the pleasant ones too, and kind of struggling with those. Oh, don't leave me, pleasant sensation. Struggling to get away of a painful sensation. But then as you contemplate those and relax around them and see how they're just kind of, if you don't pay attention to them, they'll just disappear by themselves. And then you can directly see perception. You can actually see it. In your next meditation, pay attention to that. Every time you hear a sound, listen to the little mental word that pops out of your mind. You hear a door slamming, you're gonna, that perception of the door slam, or somebody walking, or me talking, or the AC unit. Normally we don't see that pop out of the mind because our mind is too coarse, but in meditation, as you get more concentrated, you can see it, at least to some extent. And then you'll see the reaction to the perception. Like you hear somebody slamming a door. Why are they doing that? That's a sankhara, a reaction to that. Instead of just hearing, then there would be no reaction, right? You get my drift? If you don't identify an object, there won't be a reaction. So it's just hearing, or smelling, or seeing, without that creating a perception that's connected to the past and the future, then there won't be a reaction. That is the key to the vipassana meditation, or the development of insight, is to how to, get behind the reactions which are, causing you, just unnecessary mental stress and thinking. And then you can see the reaction, like the urge. It's still to see people, kind of moving and doing this a lot, because you haven't seen the urge. You haven't seen the perception, or even you haven't identified the feeling. Or maybe you identified the feeling, but you didn't have enough mindfulness to resist it. So you gave in and, wanted to move. So the urges and the perceptions that pop out of the mind and the urges, these are things that are probably two of the most important things that you can directly, be alert to while you're meditating. And that's a very deep level of awareness. And it becomes very, very interesting. Because if we don't have something to occupy our mind that's interesting, then the mind gets bored and goes to sleep or wants to start thinking about other useless type of things. So that's why we have to give something the mind interesting to focus on. And that's how you can use these type of reflections while you're meditating. It's called investigation of Dhamma. It's one of the enlightenment factors, actually, investigation of Dhamma. And it means breaking down and dissecting the mental process into these various things that I've been talking about. So you get understanding about it. Now, if it wasn't for some doctors dissecting a human body, would medicine have been able to advance the way it has? Right? You're just looking at a dead corpse and you don't know what happened to it. Right? You're not going to have much knowledge to do something about it. Like your autopsy, can determine the cause of death. So in the same way, Buddha dissected the body and mind into these kind of aggregates and understood how they operated for the purpose of understanding the nature of suffering. Now, I just wanted to finish by, there's a little analogy, a very nice little analogy that the Buddha made about these 5 aggregates. And he said the material form aggregate is like foam floating on a polluted river. How many people have seen a polluted lake or river and there's some white foamy stuff, along the edges of the river? It's kind of yucky, kind of yellowish color. But, first somebody walking by, and you might think it's a solid piece of styrofoam. You think, oh, I want that. Maybe somebody, left a life preserver there or something. So you go down and investigate it, and you realize, it's nothing. It's just has no core, has no solidity, just foam. You put a stick in the middle of it and shake it, it goes poof. So the Buddha gave that analogy, the material form, taking things to be solid material things, has the nature of just being like froth. This is hard to understand with the ordinary mind, but that's why this is not an ordinary, the Buddha didn't have an ordinary mind. And then perception, a feeling is like water bubbles. Now, how many of you are having a fish aquarium at home? Nobody? Well, you know what they look like, right? In the doctor's office or the veterinarian, they have a fish aquarium there. The pumps, and there's bubbles coming up from the water, or even on a lake or a river. Fish or other, there's bubbles that come up. Or better yet, when you were a kid, how many people had those little containers with the soap bubbles? You had a little round plastic thing around, and you pull it out, in a bubble. Oh, look at that bubble! And then all of a sudden, boom, boom, it's gone. So he said, feelings are like water bubbles. It means a painful feeling that you have, a pleasant feeling that you have. And they just arise, last a minute or two, and vanish. Most of them. Of course, chronic pain, that's a kind of a different story, but most of our various feelings that we have, they're like that. They think they're something, but actually they're just, they vanish quickly if you don't cling to it. And then perceptions are like a mirage. You know what a mirage is? Like in a hot day, you're looking out in the street and you think there's some water out there out in the desert. And you keep trying to go toward it and you never get to it. It was like a hallucination. Because, it's just a mentally created object. It only exists in your mind. Now, of course, it exists outside. This is the point. A lot of people argue when they hear these type of teachings. What do you mean you're denying the external world exists? We're not denying that. But we're denying how you see it. Because the way you see it is a mental image created in your mind. Because you just don't see an object, you see the history of it, and you already have ideas. The way a person is dressed, what they look like, what kind of hair they have, the skin color. The mind is already, you don't see the person for themselves. You only see this past conditioning. A person might see me on the street, say, oh, booty, or, call me some names, because his mind is creating this. And even take animals. Now, animals are on this earth, right? Is it? But you think that they see the same things you see? Because it's the way their mind is creating it, right? So that's important to understand. And that's the meaning of this. It's not that the world doesn't exist out there, but it's how our mind is recreating it with its accumulated fears, prejudices, and other types of history with the object. And then the reaction to them. Reactions are considered to be like a banana tree trunk. How many people know what a banana tree trunk looks like? Banana tree? It looks to be solid, but if you start stripping away the bark, layer after layer after layer, in the middle there is no solid core. Or like an onion. You keep stripping around the leaves of an onion, and you get into the middle also. So our reactions are basically like that. They have no real core to them. They're just conditioned reactions. And then consciousness, the ego consciousness. It's like a magician's trick, pulling a rabbit out of a hat. People think, oh, they pulled a rabbit out of a hat. So we pull our ego out of our mind. We keep recreating our ego, but in fact, it's an illusion. Check that one out. So, anyway, those analogies. The Buddha said this like how many? 2,560 years ago. He was telling this. How come our scientists don't tell us this? Huh? Why aren't they telling us this? Could ask yourself. Anyway, sorry if I sound a little funny. Just trying to put a point home. Okay, so friends, that's the 5 aggregates. And the 5 aggregates is a total meditation in itself. And you could say the whole of the Buddhist teaching is about the 5 aggregates. Because as he said, in short, the 5 aggregates are suffering. And the whole of Buddhist teaching is about suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the way leading to the cessation of suffering. So that's why the 5 aggregates is really the main focus, especially of the vipassana and insight meditation. But in order to get that insight, you need to gain some level of concentration. And there's many different levels of concentration, and there's many levels of insight. So while it's still fresh in your mind, does anybody have a specific question about any of those 5 aggregates? You always have a question. Okay, wait. They have awareness. They don't have ego consciousness.
Right. So jnana is ego consciousness, right?
Yes. It's conditioned consciousness.
Conditions. So chitta, like this moment of consciousness, that has parent, right? So it's different from jnana.
It's called anidasana vijnana. That means signless consciousness. It doesn't leave any signs. When you step in a sand, you leave a footprint in the sand. And but that's because there's a residue in there that's imprinted. But the arhat doesn't create karma, no binding karma, so that they don't leave any impressions to be found out In fact, there's a nice little, you want to hear another little story from the suttas? So there was this one Brahmin. He was a Brahmin, ascetic, and he had some kind of psychic power. And he thought he could tell when somebody died. People used to bring the skull to him, and he said just by knocking on it, he could determine, this person was born in the heaven world, or this person was born in the hell, this person was born as an animal. And he thought he could do that. And so then some of the Buddha's disciples told the Buddha about that. He said, oh, really? Tell that Brahmin to come. So the Brahmin came there, and then he told one of his monks, go bring the skull of an arhat. So he went and brought a skull of an arhat. And the Brahmin, looked at it, and it was good. He couldn't determine because the arhat didn't leave any footprint. Didn't leave any residue. It's a nice little story if you understand the meaning of that. Yes.
Sometimes when you're meditating, I guess you have a feeling of just stuff happening, but not really what's happening to, which I guess is the goal. But what's beyond? Is that what this system that way, or is there something beyond that?
No, that is the liberation. Liberation means liberation from greed, hatred, and delusion. And delusion, the deepest delusion is the I delusion. And okay, look, here's another story. You want to hear another story? It's a famous story. So there was another ascetic. He wasn't a Buddhist monk. He was an ascetic. And he thought he was going to die. He had some premonition he was going to die. So he heard about the Buddha. He'd been practicing meditation in different places and not being satisfied. Somebody said, why don't you go, ask the Buddha. He's the greatest meditator. So this Bahia, his name was Bahia. And the Buddha was on his alms round. Normally when the Buddha is walking to collect alms in the morning, he don't like to be disturbed by people, He walks silently and goes to house. But anyway, this Bahia came to the Buddha, and he said, Buddha, please, teach me a meditation in brief. Teach me a brief meditation. And the Buddha said, now is not the right time, Bahia. You want to come back after the meal. And Bahia, because he thought he was going to die soon. And he said, no, please, just really brief, just a couple words, just a brief. And again, the Buddha said, it's not really the right time now. People are, waiting. And then he kept on pestering the Buddha. The third time he asked him. And usually when somebody was asking for a third time, the Buddha, he acquiesced and said, okay. So he said, okay, Bahia, for you, in the hearing, there's only the hearing. In the seeing, there's only the seeing. In smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking, there's only smelling, touching, tasting, and thinking. And Bahia got it. He said, great. And bowed and went off. He had attained enlightenment. Or he was practicing this. He thought, wow, never heard that before. That's great. I mean, he had meditation, so he knew a lot, but, he just hadn't heard that kind of Dhamma before, and wow. So he ran off. Then a couple hours later, monks came to the Buddha and said, Lord, that person you were teaching, what kind of meditation you taught that person? He's been killed. So this Bahia, he went off and he was evidently crossing a road and a wild bull came running down the road, and Bahia probably he wasn't, paying too much attention, here and there. He was just, totally in the present moment. And this bull came and stuck his horn into Bahia's side and killed him. And when the horn was going into his side, in his mind there was just feeling. There's nobody that feels and nothing felt, just feeling. That means his mind was just totally in the present, without any sense of I, me, or mine. And he attained enlightenment and dropped dead. And so the monks didn't know that, of course. They thought he was just some funny ascetic. They didn't know he had attained an arhantship already. So they came to the Buddha and they said, "What do you do to this guy? He got killed." He said, "Don't worry about him. He was a wise person. He didn't trouble me too much. He got it. He got liberated. Just go cremate his body." And that was it. So anyway, that's the ultimate teaching. But the problem is most people can't get around these aggregates, so they keep getting stuck on these aggregates of I and me and this and that. But the mind gets liberated from that. Okay, what's yours? Last one.
So we practice like you said, like there are deeper levels and there are like aspiration levels. So when we practice like no reaction, like no to myself, so I don't react, like sound is not, I don't have reaction. But then you mentioned integrating perception, right? Do we practice like dissolving the perception or no?
You won't dissolve the perception until you've reached a level of samadhi or deep insight. That only comes at the very end, but you can intellectually understand it. See, there's 3 levels of understanding. The first is intellectual understanding that you may read in a book or you heard me give a lecture like this. And you think, oh, that's interesting. I want to try that. And so in your meditation, you may be, okay, just hearing, seeing, or earth vibration, water vibration, and stop saying I and me all the time. It's just this and that, the impersonal elements. And so, even though you haven't directly experienced it, but you're starting to formulate this thought about it now. That's called investigation of Dhamma and the Chintamaya Panya. You're developing it. Because that's the way our brain works. It works off of images. So we're creating a new image to describe our experience, but an image that leads to the end of suffering or less attachment, as opposed to images that bring more attachment. So that's why the Buddha, probably the most repeated sentence that the Buddha, if you read all the suttas, hundreds, thousands of suttas, when he's talking about the aggregates, he tells the monks, these 5 aggregates are to be thought about as this is not me, this is not mine, this is not myself. He said that, go read it. I'm not lying. And it was referring to the 5 aggregates. Form is not me, not mine, myself. Feeling, not me, not mine, myself. Perception is not me, mine, myself. Volitional formations are not me, mine, myself. Consciousness is not me, mine, myself. And if you develop that understanding at a certain point, there's something called conformity knowledge. And the mind starts to conform to that truth. And everything will drop out of the mind. All those perceptions, everything will vanish, and you will experience a state of total, liberated, formless type of awareness, the pure awareness. It might just last a momentary second, but it's such a powerful experience that it like shakes you to the core. You realize, oh my God, I've been stupid all my whole life. But still you come back to your ordinary functioning. But now you have that experience. Now you know it's there. Before you might have doubted. Well, the Buddha says there's no self, but all these other people are saying there's a self. I don't know. So people are in doubts, right? They don't know who to believe. But then through the right type of practice, you get these insights. That's why it's called insight meditation. That's why the insight meditation are these aha moments that come when you start to understand something you had just been reading before. And it's a non-verbal, direct experience of consciousness. Yeah. So that's what the meditation leads to. But, you know, it requires a lot of work.
So, loving kindness, who is doing the loving?
We are, the individual.
But if there's no self,
Well, no. See, there's two levels of reality. Conventional reality, ultimate reality. Now, we live in conventional reality, and we have to obey by that. But at the same time, we're developing the knowledge of the ultimate reality. And so at some point, you begin to merge them, and they become working, mutually working. So you use conventional reality, but at the same time, you know that some of it's an illusion. But you just play the game. Otherwise, people are not going to understand you. Like if I was to say, oh, Bhante Rahula wants some water, you'll be, well, Bhante Rahula, you know, you won't understand what I mean, right? I'm calling myself in the third person. It doesn't work in this society. They think you're mad. So, but the Buddha did use those terms. He said that Tathagata, sometimes he referred to himself as a Tathagata, one who is thus gone, and so on. But so, you know, we can use conventional reality as long as we're not deluded by it. And we use it just to live in this world. We still have to live in this world, right? We have to use the things of this world, but not get attached to it. That's the thing. Not all of them. Yeah, but anapanasati is a samatha practice, and that doesn't involve too much of the thinking. It's just, yeah, there are bhavanas that way, but usually most people practice, you know, anapanasati and, you know, vipassana and so on. But again, people are practicing that because they're not enlightened. So we have to use the conventional reality until we reach that point. Yes. But even the Buddha, I mean, the Buddha himself, you know, fully enlightened, but every morning he would survey the world with his divine eye and say, oh, that person is suffering, they need my help, like Angulimala, right? So he goes there and teaches that person Dhamma and they get awakened. So, you know, he was already fully established in ultimate reality, but he could go in and out of them simultaneously. It's like if you're sitting in the window, let's say there was no glass and you were sitting in that open window, and effortlessly you could look outside, you could look inside, you know, just at a split second, you know, where you almost simultaneously, you had perfect vision, you could see. So that's how an enlightened person's consciousness would be. They're seeing the emptiness here, but at the same time, they understand that it's conventional reality. And that's why there's a saying in Mahayana Buddhism that samsara and nirvana are the same, which is kind of true. Because the Buddha was in nirvana, but he also operated in samsara. The physical samsara, not the mental samsara. The mind was liberated from the mental samsara, but the physical world and all these things was still there. And he had to deal with it. He had to deal with foolish monks and other people telling lies about him and, you know, all kinds of things. Devadatta tried to kill him. But he did it with wisdom and you know, compassion. Okay, friends, I think better stop here, otherwise. You know, they say when you're talking Dhamma, you could talk all whole night long because it's so interesting. But now it's time to, now we've got a little bit of Chintamaya Panya going, so now we try to convert that to Bhavanamaya Panya. Okay? So again, like we did yesterday, just kind of take a deep, slow breath, try to let go of that outward focus, close your eyes. Take a deep, slow breath, hold the air in the lungs for as long as you comfortably can. Feel those subtle sensations. Just relax the mind into that, the vibrations of the body. Okay. So now just mindfully stand up. We'll do a short standing, some stretches before sitting down. If anybody's there on Zoom, we're going to do a standing meditation now. Just relax your arms at the side. Don't wait around for me. You know what to do. Let's do it. So feel that outline of the body. Doing some three-part breathing, just lengthening your element. All those elements are there. Feel the movement of the lungs, caused by the air element. Into the lungs. Then the lungs is pushing the rib cage and other flesh, which is the earth vibration. And you feel some heat in the room, it's the heat vibration. Just feel those different sensations in the body, the clothing touching the skin, subtle pulsations. You just understand those are all just cellular vibration. Energy vibration. If the body sways or moves, that's the air vibration. It's not me moving, it's the air vibration. It's not me breathing, it's just the air element. Combination of the air element and the earth element. Past karma causing this body to breathe. Any sound, just hearing. Nobody hearing, nothing heard, just hearing. Thoughts are going through the mind, it's just thinking. No, nobody thinking, nothing thought, just thinking. Your perception. If you perceive the outline of your body, that's a perception. If you cling to that perception as being my body. Try to understand that. So while we're standing, we're going to do a little perception exercise, going down through the body, of identifying the body parts, feeling the vibrations in them, understanding they're just perceptions. So bring your attention up and try to feel the hair on your head, or your scalp. If you notice any subtle little itching sensation, on the top of the head. Those are just vibrations. If you're thinking my head, that's a perception. If you're thinking head is a perception, and then my head, the ego consciousness. Try to understand that. See how it's working in your mind. Now move the attention down to your face. Begin to feel your eyes, the sensations on your face. They're also just the material vibration. Some of them might be pleasant, some of them might be unpleasant. You might identify it as my nose, my eyes, my mouth. That's the perception. And that's my mouth, my face. Ego consciousness. Moving the attention downward, feel the shoulders, relax the shoulders. Feel the clothing where they rub the skin of the shoulders, that's the earth vibration. solid element of clothing, rubbing the solid element of skin and bone, producing the earth vibration. Yet you turn it into the shoulder, and you turn it into my body, the perception. Move the attention inward to feel your chest, the heartbeat. Clothing touching the chest, the earth vibration, heart beating. Those are perception. If you have a pain in the chest, you might worry, oh, the pain in my chest, and a heart attack. It's clinging, fear, worry. Just continue to move your attention downwards, stopping at different places of the body, doing the same mental analysis. Identify the aggregates. Especially your hands and fingers. Moving on down to the feet, pressing the floor. That's a good one. Be alert for any thoughts or ideas of I, me, or mine that arise. Just feel all those intense vibrations. That's the living process. The parallel dimension, parallel universe, the inner body. And now begin some three-part breathing. Do a few stretches before sitting down again. In breath.